All right. Good morning to everyone in Japan, and or good afternoon or good evening to anyone watching from Chile or any other country around the world. Thank you so much for tuning into our webinar today titled Chile Has Woken Up. My name is Haruna Suzuki from Amnesty International Group 95 here in Osaka, and I will be moderating today's event. Today, we have a very special presentation for you all prepared by some of the Amnesty International Chile members regarding the protests that were happening in the country. The current demonstrations in Chile have reflected the frustration the people are feeling. With the ever-increasing cost of living, low wages and pensions, a lack of education rights, a poor public health system, and crippling inequality, Chileans stood up for to fight for their own rights by demonstrating on the streets. However, these protests were met with violent reactions by the state. State forces resorted to violence and sexual abuse that led to severe injuries and even the death of some of the protesters. Thousands filed complaints against public officials for using torturing and inhumane methods towards the protesters. However, police officers and state forces carrying out these human rights violations often remain in their posts facing no charges at all. So the Chilean members of Amnesty International today, who are here with us today, are going to present about the current situation in Chile and provide us with some of their personal experiences to help us get a glimpse of what it was like to risk their own lives to protest for their own rights. We wanted to host this webinar in hopes that people in Japan and all over the world are able to learn about the situation in Chile and hear firsthand from some of the activists on the front lines of these demonstrations. We hope that this presentation will give you some insight into the protests and help you learn more about some of the grave human rights violations that are going on around the world. So we are so thankful to our guest speakers here with us today for willing to share their experiences and give us some knowledge on the protests that have been going on. If any of the viewers have any questions throughout the presentation, please send them over to the comments on YouTube or Facebook. And at the end of the presentation, we will take about 15 to 20 minutes to have a Q&A session with the Amnesty International Chile members who will be willing to answer your questions. And this event was organized in collaboration with a few of our English groups of Amnesty International Japan. Us here at Group 95 in Osaka are very grateful to ITEN from Tokyo, Amnesty International Nagoya Multicultural Group, for organizing this event with us. To briefly introduce these groups, I would now like to pass the mic to Tanvi from Group 95.
So good morning to everyone in Japan, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone elsewhere in the world. This event has been organized by Amnesty International. Amnesty International is a human rights non-governmental organization which has its headquarters in the United Kingdom and about 7 million members around the world. The Amnesty International Japan office is located in Tokyo. So to start off with the Amnesty International Osaka Multicultural Group, we at the Osaka Multicultural Group aim to encourage young people to get more involved in human rights work. In fact, our group mainly consists of university students from Osaka University. We meet about once a month to discuss human rights, current affairs, and advocacy. All our meetings are also open to non-members. In fact, we will be organizing a Right for Rights event in January next year, and we would strongly encourage anyone who's interested to join us. Our contact information is amnestyosaka@gmail.com. Moving on to other groups who've contributed to the event, the Amnesty International Nagoya Multicultural Group aims to allow those who can't speak Japanese to partake in human rights activism in Japan. They also meet about once a month every fourth Sunday, and they hold various seminars called the Freedom Toast Cafe. They have a podcast called the Rentaikan podcast, and they host letter writing campaigns and other in-person events. Their contact information is amnestynagoyamcg@gmail.com. Lastly, Amnesty International Tokyo English Network is the largest English-speaking amnesty group in Japan. They meet once a month for education and letter writing. These meetings are also open to non-members, and they also attend international school festivals, organize pub quizzes, and other fundraising events for Amnesty International. Their email address is info@ithon.info. So please feel free to contact any of these groups if you're interested in joining them, or if you would simply like to attend their activities as a non-member. Thank you. Now, moving on to our main event. Before we start the event, I'd like to place a quick content warning. This event will delve into details of physical and sexual assault. These topics may be distressing to some viewers, so discretion is advised. Thank you.
All right, so please remember that we have opened the chats on YouTube and Facebook for anyone who would like to ask a question to our speakers from Chile, and they will be willing to answer your questions after the presentation. So now, without further ado, I would like to give a warm welcome to the amazing team from Chile.
Well, thank you, Haruna. Good morning to everyone, and well, hello for everyone in the world. First of all, on behalf of Amnesty International Chile, I want to thank you all for this opportunity to raise awareness about the social unrest and the human rights violation that are currently occurring in our country since last year. So we are very thankful for this opportunity. And well, let's start with our presentation. So yes, well, Chile despertó, has woken up. Next slide, please. Well, we are all activists from Amnesty Chile. We are Florencia Moral, Daniel Rivera, Alison Castillo, Bernardita Buch, and myself, Patricio Trincado. Next slide, please. So, well, first of all, we are going to talk about context in order to better understand what is going on right now in Chile. We have to go back in time to the early 70s. Back then, the president was the socialist Salvador Allende, but he wasn't able to finish his term in 1973 with help from the CIA and the local right-wing political parties. There was a military coup led by the army, the navy, the air force, and the carabineros, or national police. This coup overthrew the elected government of Allende and appointed Augusto Pinochet as the de facto president. This guy with the dark glasses here in the pictures. His dictatorship lasted from 1973 to 1990. Well, this was kind of common in Latin America back then. Many countries of the region had their own right-wing dictatorships, but unlike the other ones, Pinochet's dictatorship had very specific goals. Besides killing and torturing a lot of people, this regime wanted to refound Chile, changing the economic and political system. Well, to do that, he carried out many reforms suggested by the so-called Chicago Boys, and this was a group of Chilean economists that studied at the University of Chicago in USA and followed the ideas of neoliberalism. So that's why these reforms consisted mainly in privatizing important sectors of our economy. For example, they privatize the access to water or the social security system, the healthcare, among other things. Well, Pinochet wanted these changes to last, and he wanted to make nearly impossible to change these reforms if someone came to power in the future. So in order to achieve this, he created a new constitution, a constitution that was designed to prevent this from happening, to maintain everything unchanged for the next years. So after Pinochet left power in 1990, the Concertación, which was a coalition of political parties that opposed the dictatorship, took office and governed the country for the next 20 years. But there were very little changes in the overall economic system. So this meant a lot of problems for a lot of people. For example, we have a very low minimum wage. We have to pay for almost everything. We have a very bad public education, very bad public healthcare. The pensions for all the retired workers are very low. There is a lot of people in debt, among other things. Besides this, Chile is also a very unequal country. A small portion of the population holds most of the resources, and therefore they don't have to deal with these problems, which, well, in my opinion, it's quite unfair. So it was natural that with the time, people started to get mad about this whole situation. Of course, the social unrest from last year wasn't the first time that people went out to the streets. There were many opportunities before where this happened. The most important ones were led by students, by high school students. For example, in 2006, during the first presidency of Michelle Bachelet, high school students started to protest for better education, but they were unsuccessful. Later on, in 2011, during Sebastián Piñera's first presidency, and the first right-wing president after the dictatorship, the students went out to the streets again, demanding public, free, and quality education for all. This time with help from university students. And well, the 2011 student movement was more successful than before. They achieved some things. There were new political parties that emerged from this movement, and Bachelet was elected for a second time, and she conducted some reforms that helped a little bit, but weren't nearly enough to improve the general situation of the country. So that's how we arrived to 2019. Sebastián Piñera was elected president again. And well, the general situation was virtually the same as in the last 30 years. So that's how we arrived to the social unrest in October. Well, everything started with, as many other protests here in Chile, with the students. Well, first of all, there was in October, the government had the brilliant idea to increase the price of the subway ticket in the metro of Santiago. You know, Santiago is the biggest city in our country, it's the capital city, and the main way to move around is the subway. So an increase in the price, that was an increase in 30 pesos, which is roughly 4 cents of a dollar or 4.30 yens, which at first sight doesn't sound that much, but of course, considering the very low wages from everyone, it's actually additional expense that people doesn't want. So everyone were fed up with this increase, and the students started to protest. The week before, the 18th October, there were many groups of organized students who got into the subway without paying as a form of protest. That happened all over Santiago. And instead of looking for a peaceful solution, the government sent the carabineros, you know, the national police, to prevent the students from doing that. Well, violence escalated through the week. People got angrier and angrier every day with the unnecessary violent response from the government to this issue. And eventually, on October 18th, the social unrest officially began. People went out to the streets to protest against the injustice of the current economic system, not only in Santiago, but in all over the country. That day, there were barricades everywhere in the city. Many metro stations were burned, and well, people went out to the streets to bang their pots and pans, which is a traditional way of peaceful protest here in Chile. And well, they were asking for Piñera's resignation and structural changes in the economic system. And there were also many marches during those days. The biggest one on 25th October, with more than 1 million people attending. Well, I I was there, and it was I've never seen so many people together before. And well, there were many slogans that people chanted during these marches. For example, Chile despertó, which means Chile has woken up. And it's not 30 pesos, it's 30 years, which refers to the 30 years that after Pinochet's dictatorship, where nothing changed. Sadly, President Piñera didn't look for a peaceful solution to this crisis. Instead, he declared a state of constitutional exception. He declared a curfew, and he sent not only the Carabineros, the national police, but also the army to stop the protesters. Just as in the good old days of the Pinochet dictatorship, we had curfews and military repression all over again. So that was not good. Piñera even said that we are, and this is a literal translation, we are at war with a powerful and implacable enemy. He meant by this powerful enemy, the protesters. So yes, very, very bad. Anyway, because of this repression, many people lost their eyes and were injured in other ways. A lot of protesters were incarcerated in dubious circumstances, and there were denounces of torture and sexual assault committed by members of the Carabineros and the army. Many NGOs and international organizations emitted reports denouncing serious violations of human rights. One of them was Amnesty International, with its report Eyes Over Chile. And well, now we are going to talk about its findings in the next slide. Next slide, please. And now, well, Daniel, please continue.
Thank you, Pato. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Daniel. I will be talking about the report Eyes on Chile, specifically about the section called Use of Force by State Agents. And first, I wanted to begin saying that Chile is a state party to international conventions and is therefore obliged to fully guarantee human rights like the right to health and education. But what has been observed during the period covered in the report, and even before and after that period, is that the state has failed to guarantee basic human rights. There are many times that the use of force is unavoidable, but it must have always a legitimate objective and must be within a regulatory framework. Also, law enforcement officials must not cause more harm than the harm they are seeking to prevent. Now, during a demonstration, some groups and individuals have used violence, but this does not make the entire protest violent, and therefore authorize security forces to use force to disperse it. The authorities must distinguish between individuals who are engaged in violence and those who are not. But by and large, this has not happened. Also, the deliberate use of potentially lethal force to maintain order cannot be considered a proportionate use of force. But sadly, this is exactly what has happened here. Next slide, please. Okay, next, I wanted to talk about the privation of life by excessive use of force. And here we wanted to highlight the case of Alex Núñez Sandoval. He was a 39-year-old father of 3 children. He participated in a demonstration on Sunday, October 20, 2019. He got home at 9 p.m. and went out again. At that moment, a Carabineros vehicle arrived and a group of officers got out and started to beat him without saying a word. He didn't manage to escape and was repeatedly kicked in the head and in the middle of the body for several moments until he was abandoned in the road. After that, Alex was able to get home, where he relayed what had happened to him to his family. He refused to go to the hospital and just said that he wanted to stay home and rest. At 7 a.m. The next morning, he got worse and lost consciousness. He was taken to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with an inoperable edema and died the next day. After that, a judicial investigation based on the complaints made by Alex's former wife, the National Human Rights Institute, and the State Defense Council is still ongoing, more than a year later, without any results. At the same time, the National Police has said that an internal investigation was started, but it is still ongoing at this time. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we wanted to issue a warning about the next image that we are going to show. They are a little strong, so we wanted to warn you about that. Next slide, please. Okay, now I will be talking about the use of lethal and potentially lethal weapons. So firearms using live ammunition should never be used as a tool in the policing of demonstrations because they design it to be lethal. They can only be used if someone's life is in immediate danger. And this is also reflected in the Carabineros protocol, which establishes that lethal ammunition can only be used in situations of lethal aggression, which pose a grave risk to someone's life. But despite all this, during October 2019, Carabineros fired 515 cartridges of lethal live ammunition, according to officials, statistics provided by the police force. There were 7 people whom Carabineros allegedly shot with lethal ammunition in the period between October 18 and November 30th of 2019. Now here in the picture on the left, we can see that the police use potential lethal weapons as tactical tools to control the protest. In this case, we can see how the Carabinero is shooting at protesters that are far away and don't pose any threat and are actually fleeing. This picture was taken on October 22nd of 2019 in Valparaiso, Chile. Now, in the case of less lethal weapons, we have the picture in the middle that shows a 24-year-old man wounded by multiple rubberized buckshot. The picture was taken on October 19 of 2019. This type of ammunition must be designed so that on impact only causes pain and bruising, but it shouldn't penetrate the skin. It was evident that officers did not follow the proper use of this type of ammunition, which should be shot at a safe distance, at an angle below the waist, and also with a precision, so it does not hit people that are not involved in acts of considerable violence against others. And the picture on the right illustrates the case of Renzo in Ostroza. He was walking back home with a friend when a national police official kicked his friend on the back. Renzo was filming this incident with his phone when he told the official that he had his name on film. He continued filming when he was hit by 19 pellets in the face and in the body. He received no help from police officer who had shot him. And as a consequence of his wounds, Renzo suffered an almost total and permanent loss of vision in his left eye. The judicial investigation is still ongoing. This picture was taken on October 21, 2019. Next slide, please. Now about chemical deterrents. Tear gas as lethal and less lethal weapons was disproportionately used as a tactical tool for dispersion and was also shot using grenade launchers, whereby in multiple occasions the container was directed at people's bodies to cause injury and not really as a tool for dispersing crowds as they should be used. Also, the impossibility to trace the origin of pellets and gas canisters, which unlike lethal ammunition do not leave a specific mark on the weapon, encourage the sense of impunity within the institution. In the picture to the left, we can see an officer firing a tear gas directly at the body and not at a safe angle to avoid physical harm. This way of shooting has the potential to inflict severe damage, especially if it hits the head or face. This picture was taken in Santiago on November 12, 2019. Now, the picture in the middle illustrates the use of disproportionate force to inflict pain. According to international standards, the force must always be necessary and proportionate to the threat being countered. Of course, the national police officers are not authorized by law to use their vehicles to inflict physical harm on protesters under any circumstances. In spite of that, the National Human Rights Institute filed complaints on behalf of 20 people who were allegedly run over by national police officials. This picture was taken in Valparaiso, Chile on November 14, 2019. Now, the picture to the right illustrates a case in which the national police repeatedly beat a person they have already restrained. And it's just one example in which the national police is using disproportionate force in relation to the threat being countered. The National Human Rights Institute filed complaints on behalf of 630 people who were reportedly beaten by the national police between October 18 and November 30th of 2019. And the majority during arrest or when they were already in custody. Next slide, please. We wanted to highlight two emblematic cases that occur in the month of November 2019. The first one is about Fabiola Campillay. She was a 36-year-old mother of 3 children who left her home on November 26 at around 9 p.m. to go to her place of work, accompanied by her sister. When they reached the corner of her road, they saw a police line, and without prior warning, the police began firing tear gas grenade with grenade launchers towards them. The third tear gas canister hit her in the face. The impact caused Fabiola to fall with her face covered in blood. Neighbors came to help, and her sister approached the police to ask them to take her to the hospital. In response, the police officer threw a smoke grenade at her feet. The national police then withdrew from the scene, throwing a final tear gas grenade from a grenade launcher at the spot where Fabiola had fallen. Fabiola suffered multiple fractures in her face, spent more than 7 months in the hospital, and lost her sight and her senses of smell and taste. 2 officers have been discharged from the national police force, and the captain that shot Fabiola has been charged for the crime, but she has not received any help from the government nor the national police. The second case is about Gustavo Gatica. He's a 21-year-old student that on November 8, 2019, he went to the Plaza Italia in Santiago to join demonstrations that had regularly assembled on Fridays and in that place since the beginning of the crisis. He was with a group of protesters when police forces began firing riot-controlled shotguns loaded with rubberized backshots at the protesters. They were aiming to the upper part of the body of the protesters, and Gustavo was hit directly in both eyes by the projectiles. He received no help from the officials, and they even fired tear gas bombs at him and several others that were injured while they were being treated by a health post stationed there. As a consequence of his injuries, Gustavo was permanently blinded in both eyes. The official that shot Gustavo has been discharged from the force and criminally charged for his actions, but the trial is still ongoing. We would like to invite everyone watching to participate in the campaign Right for Rights 2020. To do that, you can find more information in the website amnesty.org, including the cases that are covered in the 2020 election of this campaign, and the different ways that you can participate, such as writing a letter and sending it to the addresses provided, or even taking a photo of the letter and posting it to your social media channels, tagging it hashtag W4R20, which means Right for Rights 2020. Also, if you tag at Amnesty in your post on Twitter and Instagram, we can find you and retweet your post. Next, we wanted to present you a short video about the case of Gustavo Gatica. Well, here we can see the national police shooting what appears to be rubberized buckshot at an angle that's clearly dangerous. In this way, this was the way that Gustavo was wounded in his eyes by bullets that were supposed to be not lethal. But the way they were used during the protest by the national police caused that many protests suffer wounds to their upper bodies and especially to their eyes. Now, Gustavo has now become an icon of social unrest, of the social unrest here in Chile, and a living reminder of police brutality and its consequences. This is something, of course, that keeps happening all around the world. So if you want to support Gustavo, we invite you to participate in the campaign Right for Your Rights 2020. And as I said before, you can find all the information on the website amnesty.org. So next, Florencia Moral will continue with talking about the report.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. The following part of the presentation, it's about command responsibility, and it's titled Commanders Could and Should Have Avoided the Violence, but They Didn't. As you may know, just because those in charge of officers on the ground aren't directly responsible for the harm caused to protesters in the streets, does not free them of ultimate responsibility for the human rights violations committed on their watch. Command responsibility exists when commanders knew or should have known about violations and failed to take a step to prevent them or punish the perpetrators. So human rights standards require that the responsibility of commanders for human rights violations be investigated when basically three criteria are met. On one hand, knowledge of human rights violations. So if there's evidence that the commanders knew or should have known the human rights violations were taking place, this does not necessarily mean that they needed to know in real time about the perpetration of the abuses, but rather it is enough that they had general information that alerted them to the fact that their subordinates may have been committing those crimes. On the second hand, hierarchy and organizational capacity. So whether there are sufficient indications that the commanders had the material capacity to prevent and punish the crimes. And lastly, omission to prevent and or punish the abuses. So if there's evidence that commanders failed to adopt measures to prevent and or punish human rights violations. Next slide, please. Okay, so about the first criteria that commanders knew about the violence. Amnesty's investigations concludes that commanders knew about the violence. There were multiple sources by which commanders knew or should have known that human rights violations were taking place on their watch. On one hand, communications from actors outside of Carabineros. So during the protest, social network and the media were full of information about possible human rights violations committed by Carabineros. This was often done by tagging official accounts of Carabineros on Twitter and such. In addition to publicly available information, Carabineros received information regarding potential abuses committed by its officials from the National Human Rights Institute and the National Prosecutor's Office, which passed information about complaints filed against members of the institution to its authorities or made the information publicly available. So the following numbers of complaints were made against Carabineros between October and November. More than 4,000 legal complaints and more than 500 human rights complaints. On the other hand, there also were the official internal channels in Carabineros that as of the 19th of November, Carabineros internal reporting systems registered the following numbers of injuries caused by members of the institution. More than 1,000 injuries overall and almost 500 just by shotguns. So even though the numbers are much lower than those recorded by other institutions, it should have been clear to Carabineros commanders that there was a problem here. Next slide, please. About the second criteria, that commanders had the capacity to prevent abuses. So as you can see in the following graphic, Carabineros is a hierarchical institution in which subordinates are required to follow instructions from their superiors. The investigation conducted by Amnesty confirmed that commanders within Carabineros maintained effective control over units within the institution through the social crisis. So this criteria also checks out. Next slide, please. As a content warning, the following slide contains depiction of police brutality, so if that's something you are sensitive to, keep that in mind. And now let's continue. Finally, the third criteria, commanders failed to take sufficient measurements to prevent abuses. So commanders failed to act in the following areas: ammunition, protocols, operational planning, orders, and discipline. Now, sadly, I don't have the time to go into much detail about all of these topics, but I'll talk a little bit about one of the more important ones, in my opinion, that commanders should have banned harmful ammunition, but they didn't. So the ammunition used by Carabineros during the protests had notoriously indiscriminate and harmful effects. Shotguns were loaded with rubber-edged backshots that were made of a mix of metal and rubber, which pierced human skin and flesh in contravention of international standards. The ammunition was also highly indiscriminate because each shot contained about 12 pellets, and once the Carabinero shot, he couldn't control where the pellet went. So even if one protester was being violent and that put at risk the life of the police officer, because just then they can shoot, once they shot this kind of ammunition, not only the protester would be harmed, but also all the people around him. And that's obviously a problem with this kind of ammunition. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is the final topic I wanted to talk about, that commanders should have punished abuses and removed officers who were responsible for human rights violations from service. But they didn't. In fact, far from punishing harmful behaviors, commanders appeared to tolerate and even endorse them. Here's a quote from the former General Director of Carabineros from a speech he made to a group of other Carabineros from lower ranks. This was leaked on November from last year. He said, "There are a few things I want to tell you. You have complete support, complete backing from this General Director. How can I prove it? I will not remove anyone from service for policing procedures. No one. Even if they force me, I won't do it. You have my full backing, full support, legally and administratively. You can't count on us." Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. Finally, I wanted to show you the following graphic. It basically demonstrates the limited number of sanctions issued by commanders of Carabineros, despite the number of potential human rights abuses. So even though there were thousands of people injured and also hundreds of legal complaints made, Carabineros just conducted about 1,000 internal investigations, and the number of real sanctions was really small, only about 175. And even worse, the number of Carabineros removed from service was only 16. So, in conclusion, human rights violations were not punished. The investigation carried out were highly deficient, and even in cases where officials admitted their responsibility, they confessed basically, sanctions were not issued. And in those small cases where sanctions were issued, they were often not done by the human rights abuse itself, but for other minor administrative breaches. So the General Director was being very honest about not punishing any officer, it seems. That ends my part of the presentation of Amnesty's investigation, and now I leave you with Bernie, who will talk about our conclusions and recommendations. Oh, yeah, that could be the next slide, please.
Thank you, Flor, and thanks to everyone who is watching us right now. My name is Bernardita, and I will present the main conclusions, the recommendations, and the peaceful protest. I wanted to start with this quote said by the head of the Eastern Metropolitan Unit of the National Police during the second month of the social unrest. I'm going to use an analogy. We can say that during this time, in these 30-something days, our society has suffered from a serious illness. Let's say it's like cancer. The treatment for cancer, when these medical tools are used, good cells and bad cells are killed. This is the risk that we face when using tools such as firearms, and it is complicated. Head of the Eastern Metropolitan Unit of the National Police. This quote represents how carabineros felt about the manifestations and how the police react. This summarizes their behaviors. We identify tacit orders and deliberate or culpable omissions on the part of the National Police commanders. Next slide, please. Well, our main conclusion, physical integrity and necessary evil. Amnesty report concluded that the widespread violation of human rights were possible because commanders and superiors failed to prevent them. Strategic and operational commanders analyzed in this report knew how their subordinates were operating during the protest and the type of injury they were causing. The National Institute of Human Rights and the Attorney General's Office informed the National Police Carabineros when complaints or reports were made against their personnel. The General Director had extensive internal information at his disposal about the violations committed by operational forces. That information made it possible to gain detailed knowledge of operations and alert them to irregularities committed by their forces and their operational commanders. The strategic commanders failed to prevent such violations through the effective mechanisms available to them. For example, the General Director did not limit, much less prohibit, the use of TEC harm-same ammunition until the composition of them was questioned, and the number of eye injuries exceeded 250 cases. During the period analyzed, there was no mention of limiting the use of grenade launchers, even though their misuse resulted in serious injuries. Instead of giving precise instructions to reduce the number of injuries, the General Director kept the same imprecise and repetitive orders and did not ensure that these were communicated to operational commanders with clear instructions. Furthermore, far from being punished abusive conduct, the Director General not only allowed but supported with his statement that no one will be dismissed regardless of their actions. This support was evidenced in the number of sanctions imposed, which was extremely small compared to the number of complaints filed with the Attorney General's Office and the National Institution of Human Rights. In general, disciplinary investigations were often slow, a mere formality, and ineffective, since they lack independence and there was a clear absence of any thorough review of strategic commanders in particularly serious cases. This resulted in new serious injuries day after day, despite the fact that many of these grave practices could constitute criminal offenses. This sense of impunity was partly aided by the fact that the ammunition used was not traceable. It's not difficult to conclude that the chain of shortcomings by strategic commanders, far from being accidental, was intentional, or at least capable due to repeated negligence. This must be clarified by the Chilean justice system. Although in this report, Amnesty International does not analyze the possible responsibility of actors other than the National Police, Carabineros, it believes that the lack of control exercises over the National Police by the executive calls for clarification of the political, administrative, or criminal responsibility of all of those, right up to the highest possible level, who, in their position as guarantors, knew or should have known had they acted with diligence the scale of human rights violations and had the capacity to prevent them, but did not do so. Next slide, please. Now, our recommendations. First, we have access to justice. The Chilean authorities must publicly acknowledge the seriousness of human rights violations and crime under international law that were committed during the crisis and adopt all necessary measures to provide reparations to the victims and prevent the repetition of incidents such as those analyzed in this report. Second, we have the structural reform of the Chilean National Police, Carabineros. Due to the limitation posed by its military nature and its organic structure, a wide-ranging and in-depth reform is needed. This reform must involve not simply the modernization of some detailed aspects, but encompass a profound reform at the normative and cultural levels. This needs the respect for and protection of human rights, a genuine subordination to the civilian authorities, and a system of control, monitoring, and evaluation. Also, the following measures need urgent implementation. First, a ban on the use of TEC, harmful pellets, and other harmful ammunition for public order duties, the development of policing protocols that are detailed, precise, and fully accordance with international law, and last, the review of administrative investigations with the aim of guaranteeing that no individual who has committed human rights violations remains on the national police. And last, we have the constitutional process to guarantee human rights. The current constitution in Chile does not adequately protect human rights, and especially economic and social rights. Therefore, Amnesty International believes that the constituent process agreed on November 2019 is a historic opportunity to address these demands from all sectors of the population and should be prioritized. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about the Pacific protest, because there's no all things are bad here, no? So not all the manifestations were violent or resulted in direct confrontations with police. Most of them were very pacific, and you will see people singing, dancing the national dance, as you can see in the picture below, played sports such as volleyball or football. Also, the dancing Pikachu that you can see in the screen became a symbol of the protest, and you could see him dancing and protesting every day in Plaza de la Dignidad. Next slide, please. Then we have the Negro Matapacos. This dog became very famous during the students' protest of 2011 because he will go and confront the police during the demonstration. And during the social unrest, they built a statue of him near Plaza de la Dignidad because he is the symbol of the protest and the social anger here in Chile. Next slide, please. Then we have Las Tesis. These 4 girls you see here are Las Tesis. They created the performance A Rapist in Your Way that became very famous, and girls all around the world started to react to this performance in their own language. And police even sued them here because of what the song meant. But Time magazine put them as one of the 100 most influential people of 2020. Next slide, please. And last, we have amnesty activism, where as activists here in Chile, we also joined a lot of protests and did several activities such as gluing posters all around the city with our recommendations to the police on them. And we also went to dance with the dancing Pikachu at Plaza de la Dignidad. Well, thank you. That was my part. And now Alison will talk about the current situation here in Chile.
Thank you, Vernie, and hello everyone. Hope you can hear me well. Now I'm gonna talk to you about our current situation. This is what happened with the social unrest during the pandemic, and I also want to mention a couple of laws that are contingent on this presentation. So yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so the arrival of the pandemic to Chile, that was around March when we already started with the preventive measure and all that, represent an extension of the social and political crisis of the social unrest. During the first months, the protests stopped for a while, at least in a massive way because of the confinement, the lockdown, and everything. But it gave way to the visibility and increased even more the social gap. During the pandemic, the inequality that exists in terms of health, education, food, work, etc., has increased, or at least has become more visible. And the discontent of the people has increased too, especially with respect to the action that the government has had during this time. So from a couple of weeks before the plebiscite we had on October 25, we began to see a reactivation of the protests, especially in the Plaza de la Dignidad, or Park of the Dignity, located in the city of Santiago. And during those days, there was a police presence. And actually, during the pandemic, they spent a lot of money. The number is too big to say in English, sorry. But yeah, they spent all that money, new weapons and repressive cars and everything, which of course they have been using ever since. So also on October 2nd, one of the most terrible cases that have come to light this year and which has been viralized around the world is the case of the 16-year-old boy who was thrown from a bridge into the river by a police officer. This case has since reacted much more strongly to the protest, and it has been very controversial, actually, specifically because the prosecutor who was appointed to be in charge of the investigation was threatened with death and was arrested by the police. So, yeah, in relation to the protest, I think it is important to mention that there is evidence that the water with which the protests are dispersed in many cases has chemicals that burn the skin, and it's very dangerous as well. During October, which was also the anniversary of the social unrest, was where more people were seen gathering the protests even under the context of pandemic. And after the plebiscite, so far are still active, but in groups like not so much. Next slide, please. Okay, so and now you can see like this video that is about the case that I was talking about. You can find it on Amnesty Instagram account, because probably I think that now you can hear the video. But yeah, it's about the protest of this year and about all the cases. So yeah, you can see like this is a recent video that was made by Amnesty. And yeah, if you want to on Amnesty Instagram account. Okay, so now about some laws. To finish our presentation and moving on to law, I would like to talk to you briefly about one good news and one bad news. The good news, as you know, is that we will have a new constitution, yay! That we also have gender parity, something that has never happened before, and we have reserved state for Native people, which will make this process much more intersectional, despite the fact that quotas have not been assured for all diversities. But yeah, it's a good thing. But the bad news is that this bill, which began to be processed a couple of days ago, is a project that seeks to protect the police and gendarmerie. It is structured in 8 articles that deal with substantive, procedure, and exonerant matters. In other words, this bill seeks to sanction penalty against who commit injuries against carabineros, who is explained as who the people or organized group that will allow toward penalties against demonstrators who are taken into custody, for example. And something that is very dangerous about this bill is that it will give impunity to the police for use of weapons in relation to public order. That is to say, in the Paris, for example, and there is more informal talk of a type of license to kill. Because up to this point, as we shown, the police force has had no limit, and that there is a bill that seeks to free the police of this responsibility is unacceptable in this context in which we have been living. Having said that, this is the first part of our presentation, and now we will tell you with Florencia a little bit about our personal experience in the protest and some of the things we have had to live. So, Florencia, I leave you the space again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Okay, so in this part of the presentation, as Ali said, we wanted to talk about our experience, but not only as activists from Amnesty, but simply as Chileans and protesters. So everything we say from now on, it's from our personal point of view. Please keep that in mind. So I'm going to start telling you about the job I did during the social crisis as a member of the Defensoría Jurídica de la Universidad de Chile. That's the name of an organization, which in English it translates to something like People's Defender or Ombudsman, if you have an institution like that in your country, that was organized by Universidad de Chile, the biggest public university of the country. So we obviously weren't an official institution from the state like the National Human Rights Institute, but rather a group of lawyers, academics, and law students that volunteered to give legal advice to protesters arrested by the police and victims of police brutality, as well as serve as human rights observers at police stations and hospitals. I worked at the 19th police station of Santiago. That's one of the stations that's closest to Plaza Dignidad or Dignity Square. That was and still is the center of the protest. So we saw a lot of action. From what I saw in my about 2 months or so working there from Monday to Friday and in some weekends also, the process of arresting a protester was like this. Carabineros arrested protesters. It didn't matter at all if they were being violent or not. In fact, in most cases, the person was being completely pacific, but they arrested them anyways. So they took the protester, put them in the police car for many, many hours because the police wanted to arrest a big number of people at once. Here's a little bit of context. This was in October from last year, and that's a spring here in Chile. And our spring, it's extremely hot. So the people were basically trapped in the police cars with suffocating air. And that's why many fainted or had some kind of crisis while in there. And when they were in the cars was when Carabineros Special Forces, that's the unit that arrested people and used less lethal weapons. And also they were the ones that blinded so many people, would beat them up or even mutilate them, the protesters in there. And in some cases, and not a small number of cases, was also when they would sexually abuse or even rape people, especially if it was at night. Then they would bring them to the police stations, fill some paperwork, and then took them to a hospital. Here's another bit of context. As you could see in the graphic I showed you before, on these days there were hundreds of injured people in a single day. So all the hospitals and even clinics in the center of Santiago were completely full. So carabineros, as they are legally required, sometimes had to bring protesters to a hospital on the other side of the city. And Santiago is a big city, so this took even more hours. This was done to basically take note of the person's injuries and not really to treat them. And just then they would get back to the police station and start the process to decide if the person would be let go and free of charge, or if they had to stay the night at the station and face a judge the following day. So just then was when we maybe could talk to the protesters and find out their names and the details of their detention. This is really important because that person had been missing for at least 8 hours if they were quote unquote lucky, in a lot of cases for many more. So in the meanwhile, we had to deal with their families and friends and try to help them find their loved ones in this chaos, because the city was metaphorically and literally on fire, and there was a lot of misinformation going around, and the people were very afraid. And that's why we had such a big team of lawyers and students that would be in most of the police stations and hospitals trying to find out which people were there, their names, their ID number, and check if they were all right, if not, and if they wanted to take legal action, that kind of stuff. So at the beginning of the social unrest, Carabineros would refuse to let us know the names of the protesters that were arrested, even that if that's public information and you don't even need to be a lawyer to ask for that information. We had to take legal action, and that took even more days. So we could bring an order from a judge, and the police would let us know which people they had in the station. And in some cases that didn't work, so we had to call a judge and they would talk to Carabineros. But even that failed sometimes, so the judge had to go to the police station and basically fight with the police chief. As Patricio said at the start of the presentation, the military dictatorship is still a big scar in a lot of Chileans, and it's something that's always on the Chilean collective consciousness. Younger people are less afraid of the police and the military, yes, but it's still a really heavy topic. So what I want you to understand is that when your loved one went missing because they were arrested and you didn't know about them for hours or even a day, families were imagining the worst, that they were killed or tortured or that they wouldn't see them ever again. Well, I think that's something that would worry anyone in the world, but for Chilean people, it's even worse, in my opinion. That's why we put so much effort to find out the whereabouts of protesters. Once we could finally access information without so much trouble, our work was like this: make a really long list of names and ID numbers and their family contacts if they had one waiting for them, if they were at a hospital and if they were injured, all those details. Then we would go out because the police didn't let the families into the station, just us could do it, and had to basically scream the names of the protesters, and if the families or friends were there, explain the whole situation to them. And there would be a lot of desperate people that hadn't found where the loved ones were, and so we had to ring our colleagues on other stations or hospitals. And sometimes we could even convince Carabineros to let us use their internal system of communication to call other police stations, but that wasn't really effective because they lied a lot about the people that were arrested, so really we could only trust other lawyers. That was basically what we did. It was really a hard job, if I'm being honest. And we were there to look for missing people and give legal advice to those who wanted to take legal actions. But we ended up being also some kind of emotional support for the families. We had days in which there were over 150 protesters arrested that had to stay the night in a single police station. So we had to buy them food for over 100 people. Imagining me carrying like 5 plastic bags full of food from the convenience stores to the station. And this was only one police station. And the same thing happened in others. We also had a really terrible case in other station where some barely teenagers were arrested. So a colleague of mine had to bring them sleeping bags from his home and be with them all night. And then we had to go to our normal jobs the next morning. It was really difficult. The families would bring them food and sometimes something to keep themselves warm at night, like a blanket or a sweater. And we had to negotiate with the police so they would let us give the things to the protesters. And it was also really terrible if some of them had to take meds because it was really hard for the police to let us give the protesters their pills. There were a couple of cases where people that had to take insulin or antidepressants. But we also always succeeded in the end after a lot of fighting and diplomacy with carabineros. As some final words, when I was thinking about how to end this part of my presentation, I was wondering how to not end it in such a depressing note. I don't want the world or Chile to forget about the terrible things that happened last year and continue to happen. We must not forget it. But also remember that there are so many people that feel passionate about the defense of human rights, like the hundreds of lawyers that worked without rest, or the medic, nurses, and students that volunteer to heal injured people at the demonstrations. That sense of unity and solidarity was something I really hadn't seen before, and it was really moving, almost beautiful to see, in my opinion. I think that our work it's not done until we bring justice and reparation to all the victims, and maybe it's a really hard or impossible job, but we must not rest until it's done. So please don't forget about human rights violations in Chile, but also look out for us and hope with us that we can change this country for the better. Okay, I think I talked for way too long, so now I'm going to leave you with Ali again, that will also talk about her personal experience in the protesters.
Thank you, Florencia. Yes, regarding my experience, I want to focus on the issue of young people. And some of my experience where I not only saw my rights violated, also those of other people. So I have always been a young people who goes to demonstrations or protests even before the social unrest. And something I want to testify is that the police have always been violent. Of course, not in the massive way it is now, but it has always existed. And I think it is important to remember that in the case of the social protests, social unrest, it is something that was started by the student of the school, young people who are mostly minors. So when we talk about his rights are being violated, a large percentage of these people are young people, children even. So when everything started from day one, I joined to demonstration. At the beginning, I went every day and every week to some place to protest. And of course, like most of the demonstrators, I was gay, wet many times. I had to stay with my friends in something that we call encerrones, which is when the police leave you with no possibility of escaping from the place, and they begin to use repressive weapons that inevitably reach you. And our moments of a lot of fears, of course, because they are highly dangerous situations and in which you don't know what can happen to you. So in this moment, I even had to see people next to me with shotgun bullets in their faces or in their bodies, and that I'm grateful that they never came to me. But it is strong to see as if it happened to the person next to you, you know? So I also live in an area of the city that is considered like poor. And there are many populations here, and unlike what happened in other parts of the cities, here the repression is more. Also, the protesters, even when I did not attend to a protest, if there were where I live, the tear gas bomb and everything come to my house, as well as I could see people running from the police. And in addition to all this situation, I would like to tell you in relation to young people, but those of us who had to take the university entrance exam last year experience. This test is given by people who just finished school. This was my second time giving the test. And because of the social unrest, was a test that had to change the date because initially it was in October, and then I was called as 4 times to give it, and finally I could only give it in February this year. But in January, that was when most people gave it. I was called an hour from my house in a university that was able to give the test. And there was many young people gathered to give their tests, many with their parents. And when I arrived, it was all quiet, although there was a lot of police presence. And what happened is that without any provocation on the part of the young people who were going to give the test, more than a few songs, maybe the police from one second to another began to throw tear gas bombs and began to repress those of us who were there. That until that moment was already something normal. But what really pissed me off was that after an hour of constant fighting with the police, where there was no control, they drove off with their cars and everything. And a couple of minutes later, the press came and started showing on TV that we were causing a mess. Then the police come again as if to calm the situation. And I feel a huge anger because we were young people who were going to give a test that in itself it's unfair to enter the university because I literally paid to give that test. And after a few more minutes, we enter half and the other were left out. And after all that, we had to give the test as we could. The police were being too violent, and after several hours, some of us had to did the test. My friends were left outside of the place and continued to be repressed. And after I was given the test, but a lot of police with weapons entered to take us out of the university. And yeah, it was a horrible experience, especially because we are talking about young people. We are talking about education. And I think for all of us who were there, it was something terrible. And yeah, I want to tell this here in a way to also talk about not so well-known situations involving youth. We already know that there have been terrible violations of human rights. I have seen it in person, the brutality of police violence, and yeah, that will be all for me. If you have that, you can leave them, and I will be happy to respond. So, thank you.
All right, thank you so much to the members of Amnesty International Chile for your amazing presentation. It was so interesting to learn about the protests and to hear about how, your own experiences and how the protests personally affected your own lives, because I think that's something us around the world aren't able to experience if you're not there. I especially loved your message about how it's important to keep up the dialogue about these grave human rights violations, but also it's important to not forget to be positive and not to forget that, there are people fighting for their own rights and fighting against these grave human rights violations. So thank you so much for your presentation. Since we have a few questions from our viewers, so I think we'd like to move on to the Q&A if that's okay. All right. Okay, so the first question we have from one of our viewers is, they write, when we write to Chile's government in support of your efforts, what are the key points we should make from other countries? So yeah, if any of you want to answer that question.
Yes, I can answer that. Well, in my opinion, I think there are two key points. First, I think it's very important to remind the government and everyone that these grave human rights violations actually happened, because there is kind of a negationism in the government, and sometimes when they talk in TV on TV, they kind of say that, well, there weren't actually human rights violations, but this was, a couple of crimes from a couple of bad apples in the police, and well, that's not actually truth. So I think it's really important to remind that there were actually human rights violations. And secondly, I think that it's also important to demand that the high commands of the Carabineros are actually investigated for their responsibilities in these human rights violations. And also, well, if there is enough proof, the responsibilities of the government, because as the government, I mean the civil authorities are in charge of the oversight of the Carabineros. So if the Carabineros committed human rights violations, well, the government should have done something to prevent that. So they might be also responsible. So I think those are the most important points that people should have in mind when writing these letters.
All right, thank you so much. Does anyone want to add on, or should we move on to our second question? Okay, so the second question that we have from one of our viewers is, what has been your most effective tool in struggling for change?
Okay, I will answer that question. So when the social unrest began, I became the coordinator of the street activism team. And it was a real struggle. I would say that being an activist, especially here in Chile, it's a big struggle. You will feel the burnout, you will feel stressed, hopeless. So in that case, you need to find effective ways or effective tools to make that change you want to see, So I think that the main tool and the most effective tool it's going out. Be that activist that is in the protest, that is manifesting with the other people. That's the most effective way, because people will see you, people will see Amnesty. When we went to the protest, they received us and they applauded us and they were so happy to see us. So I think that having people's back in that way, going to them, talk to them and say, okay, we are Amnesty International, we are here for you. It's the most effective tool. It's more effective than tweeting something, doing a report or something. It's having people's back and be there for them. I think that's the most important. And when you feel hopeless in those cases, they will go and tell you, okay, we support you. We are here with you. We are going to, I don't know, show this report, go and manifest, or go and say we are with Amnesty International. And I think that's the most effective tool for all of us as activism, and having that support, and also being with other activists for all around the world and showing our experiences. For example, this instance here, talking with you to Japan, direct from Chile, talking about our experiences. This is our opportunity. This is the tool we wanted to have. And so thank you so much for everyone who is seeing us tonight or tonight in Japan.
Okay, I would like add to that also. In my opinion, I think you could say that the master tool for achieving change is getting together, because in the protest when I was there, you could see that there were many groups defending different causes, but also fighting for a single one, unifying one, that was to have a better country, a better life. So I think that every tool, for example, social network or anything that, or groups with people that you have something in common, everything that works to get people together and to fight for change is very important. And what I could conclude from what has happened here in Chile, that we managed to make happen something very important, that is the beginning the process to change the constitution of the country, and that is something very difficult to achieve. So that for me is a proof that actually the power has never left the people. It's just that sometimes we have trouble getting together. We are infighting sometimes, but if we get together, we can fight for the same cause that is common to everyone. There's nothing that can stop us. So that was awesome to see.
I wanted to add something too. I fully agree with what Daniel has said. I think that because of all this economic system that we had for all these years, people used to be a little bit individualistic, I think it's said. And I think that the social unrest, one of the things that achieved was to get everyone together for a common goal. And I think that was something very, very beautiful from these protests and these manifestations, that when you get there, you felt everyone together, like an actual community, in contrast with what happened before, when everyone just look out for him or herself. So yes, I think it's very important that people get together for this common goal of improving the general situation in our country.
Thank you so much for your comments. Yeah, and I think it really shows us the importance of showing up and just being there and being present for a social cause and all coming together. And that's something we can learn from these protests in Chile. And we're so thankful to have you guys here to share your experiences with us, to the people of Japan. And we hope that, in a way, by learning about the issues in Chile, we can also show up and support in our way, even though we're across the world. So yeah, thank you so much. Now can we move? Is it okay if we move on to the third question? Okay, so for the third question, what information do you have about injured police officers? Why don't you refer to this? And aren't there any human rights violations there as well?
Okay, so the report states that as of November 30, the police reported around 2,500 carabineros injured in demonstrations. That's a very big number, but mostly of these injuries were minor. They did not report any death carabineros. So according to the information provided also by the General Rosas himself publicly, as March of 31st, there were 4,817 carabineros injured, 200 of them seriously. So he also said there was 500 attacks and barracks. So it seems obvious that carabineros are human beings and therefore obviously has the same human rights as all of us. So in general terms, human rights are the obligations of the state. Okay, so that's the first thing. So therefore, was an individual person who does not play a role in the agent of the state injures another person, in this case, a policeman or a policewoman, he's committing a crime, but does not have the responsibility under international law, but rather under criminal law. So the protections of human rights of this policeman or policewoman who was injured is the responsibility of the state, in one hand, to guarantee the access to justice, so that crime can be investigated and have access to justice, and the responsible who did that is punished. Our report focuses only on human rights violations by agents of the state, which is why we don't address in depth these cases of injured policemen or policewomen. And on the other hand, the state is responsible for adopting necessary measures to prevent placing the victim in situations that put his or her physical strength or life at risk, by providing him or her with the necessary preparation to adequately deal with this corresponding situation. A reform of carabineros must also aim this second aspect, guaranteeing rights in terms of training, labor rights, necessary resources, etc.
I wanted to add a little bit to what Bernie said. People usually say that comment, what about Carabineros human rights? And obviously Carabineros also have human rights, because but people seem to misunderstand what human rights are, I think, because if a protester, let's say, I don't know, injures a Carabinero, that's a common crime and should have been judged, etc. But the human rights, it's a violation. It's committed by the state itself, not by a single protester or a couple of protesters. Even Carabineros that I talked with complained about this. The people are also violating our human rights, but that's not the case at all. Where I think there are human rights violations of Carabineros is within the Carabineros itself, because, as I said, Carabineros is a really hierarchical and militarized institution. So there's a lot of mistreatment of younger officers, that they are barely kids. Some of them are younger than me, like teenagers. Their superiors bully them, drive them to suicide, or sexually abuse them. That's a human rights abuse. But if a protester insults them, that's not the same thing. And that's the little bit I wanted to add.
Thank you guys so much. We have another question from our Facebook. Have you made wide use of social media?
I'm gonna answer that. And yeah, I think that the answer is yes, because of the pandemic. So especially our social media is the almost only tool that we have, because of course, before the pandemic, we usually did a lot of things in the street, and that was our way to work. But now, of course, we had to change everything and increase our content on social medias. So yeah, we had to use it a lot, of course. We use it actually for the constitutional process and everything. So yeah, it's something that we had to use a lot.
Yeah, I bet the pandemic and the coronavirus situation really changed the way you guys had to, go forward with your activism from previous years. We also have another question from, I think, YouTube. How is the media reporting on the protests, and what are the reactions on social media?
Well, I can answer that. Well, here in Chile, as well, many things, the media, and especially the TV channels, there are they are property of a small group of corporations, and because of that, I think that they're usually they usually hold some conservative views about things, and in the case of the protest, I think they were not really objective about the information they presented on TV, and well, in the newspapers as well. There were the two more important newspapers were really against all these social unrest. So what they report there was a really biased news. So in that way, I think that social media was really helpful for the people, because there we could saw all the human rights violations. Usually people recorded all these atrocities with their phones, and they posted them after on social media. So that's how people knew what was going on everywhere. So yes, that actually.
Would anyone like to add on, or can we move on? All right, I'll move on then. So the following question is, did you talk to the government about this report and to the police? Did you give them this information that you have?
Okay, so in the case of the government first, during the mission in October and November of 2019, we tried to meet with the Undersecretary of the Interior and the President of the Republic. But initially, we didn't get any answer. Only after presenting the preliminary conclusions on November 21st, the opportunity arose to meet the former Minister of Interior, Gonzalo Blume, which was held on November 26th. At that meeting, we were given a pen drive with various documentary information that we use for the investigation. And then we asked for additional information as a follow-up for the meeting, a request that was not answered, and also through the transparency law that was not answered also. And on September the 28th of this year, our director for the Americas, Erika Guevara, sent a letter to the President Piñera requesting a virtual meeting to present the main conclusions and recommendations of our report prior to its launch, and to hear his reactions. And this letter has not been answered by the time of the launch and now. In the case of Carabineros, the fact-finding mission met with the General Director and the Carabineros Human Rights Director, and they provided us information that was used in our report. And then we request additional information through a transparency law, and which was partially answered. And in not all cases of the eye trauma lost their sight, and not that it's all eye except. So it's true, some people suffered temporary damage and they were able to, or may be able to, regain their sight completely. However, this does not make the list of eye injuries any less serious. This number of people injured in their eyes shows that harmful ammunition was used and that no upper body was shot, which is precisely the opposite of what should be done. And whether or not they lost their sight was a matter of chance, not intention or the action of different carabineros, as they had no way of controlling damage will cause. So we had some answers, but they were not the one we were expecting.
All right, thank you. I'm actually very interested in the next question that we have here. Can Amnesty International bring the Chilean authorities to international justice? What else can be done beyond social media and taking out statements?
Okay, so this is the. Do you want to answer this, or?
I don't know. I was thinking you would tire of talking. No, I can answer it.
No.
Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, basically, the role of Amnesty as a general role is to generate pressure through visibility, incidence, and mobilization of the human rights violations in general. And the report we presented here was sent to multiple national authorities, as Bernie said, that are responsible for the fulfillment of our recommendations, like the President Piñera, the Ministers of Interior and Justice and Human Rights, the national prosecutors, among others, and it was also shared with international bodies like the Committee Against Torture and others. So, and also we will continue to work with the victims, both of the cases, for example, of Gustavo Gatica and Fabiola Campillay that Danny mentioned. Already have we already have talked to them and are working currently with them. And we want to support them in their quest for justice, and we will follow up on the process of complaints for crimes against humanity. But as in the international justice, while we do not rule it out, it is also a little too early to take that step in order to reach international instances. It is appropriate to exhaust domestic remedies. And we hope in this sense that the Chilean justice systems will rise to the occasion and that it will be possible to achieve justice, including common responsibility in local courts. That was it.
Bernadita, do you want to add on, or would you like to add on? Okay. So to the viewers, I think we'll close off the question with another 2 or 3 questions. So if you have any, just send them over to our YouTube or Facebook. So moving on to the next question. In your opinion, so the human rights violations committed by the Carabineros, are they examples of personal failure by individual officers, or are they rather proof of a deeper institutional problem?
Yeah, I can answer that. I think, in my opinion, it goes deeper because we have proof that the superior officers knew about the grave violation of human rights that were being committed, be it from the media or from institutions here in Chile that sent them the data. And they didn't do enough to prevent them and even to reprimand those individual officers that were committing those violations. So I also think that the government carries a responsibility here because they knew what was happening and didn't take the necessary actions to stop the violations. So if justice worked as it should, I think there should be an investigation to find the administrative or penal responsibilities to the highest levels of the government and inside the national police institution.
Would anyone like to add on, or? Okay, we'll move on then. So the next question. So I think this is from YouTube. So what reactions have you had from politicians? Are there politicians speaking out in support of the protesters?
I can answer that. Well, there are politicians that support the protests, the protesters, and there are also politicians that doesn't support the protesters. Usually, the right-winged politicians do not support the protest, and well, among them, you know, the government and the political parties that support the government of Piñera. Usually, they deny that human rights violations happened and that kind of stuff. But of course, there are many other politicians that actually wanted to support the protest, and well, they after the protest, they try to some of them try to make some reforms, but they were unsuccessful. The only like successful reform that they could make was this constitutional process and changing the constitution, which is of course a very big thing. But yeah, I mean there are both there are like both types of politicians in this area.
The final and last question, actually, I think kind of relates to what you were saying and what you were talking about just now. But do you think that the new constitution would help strengthen respect for human rights in Chile?
I can answer a little bit, and I think Bernie wanted to add that also. I'm personally, I'm really hopeful for our new constitution in the works. So I think it will definitely be of help. Like I was talking about, people currently feel very passionate about the defense of human rights. So that's a really big step that I hope it will be reflected on our new constitution. Also, there's a thing that Patricio said a little bit about it in the beginning of the presentation, that our constitution was made by 5 right-wing men in a military dictatorship. Well, I won't go much into the legal text, but it's written in a way that doesn't really guarantee or doesn't really give any real rights to the people. So I think that almost any constitution that we made will be better than that, for the sole reason that it's being made by people, not 5 men, and 5 men complicit of human rights violations. And also in a democracy, I think that's really important. And maybe it is something hard to understand for people that have constitutions that were not made in this context. But just what we achieved here, I think it's really important, and that human rights will be in a better place, let's say, that what we currently have.
Sorry. I wanted to add something, that the assembly that's going to write this new constitution is going to be 100% elected by the people. So that's good news. 50% of this assembly will be men, and the other 50 will be women. And there will be indigenous people representing this, Mapuches, and also we hope that we have some migrants also participating from Venezuela, Haiti. That will be good news also. So I think in that way, we are hoping for the best. We are hoping for this constitution to have those health and education rights we all are protesting for. So in that way, we are very optimistic. We want to feel that this is going to be the change that we wanted to see since the beginning of the social unrest. So I think this is the moment. This is our moment. I think it's not the political movement. This is not, I don't know, the conservative movement. This is the people movement. So I think in that way, this will define a good result for all of us. I don't know if Patricia wanted to add something.
Yes, I wanted to add that, well, as I said in the presentation, the actual constitution, the current constitution, was designed to prevent any changes from happening. And well, during these 30 years after Pinochet's dictatorship, there were some initiatives to change some things, but most of them were not possible because they were unconstitutional. So even if the new constitution is like not the best constitution of the world, I think it would be better than what we have now, because it will allow to make some other changes. Of course, the new constitution will not improve the general situation from at the very same at the very same day, but it will allow to make changes in the future and to improve the situation, because with the current constitution we are not able to do that.
Thank you guys so much. It's great that we ended on kind of a positive note, and to hear that you guys are optimistic about the future, and that this is hopefully the next step and a step towards change and a better situation for Chile in general. But yeah, I think this is all we have time for today. But thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us. It was so lovely to meet you all and hear about your experiences and learn about the situation in Chile. So thank you so much. So for this event, we're so grateful. Sorry, give me just one second. So yeah, sorry, we're waiting for a screen to be shared. Thank you all so much. All right, so now that the presentation has ended, we would like to give a great thank you to the people who have helped organize and support this event. We're very grateful for Glenn Cohen, Marian Hara, Bjorn Skimcat, Bernadita Book, Alison Castillo, Beatriz Martos, Daniel Rivera, Florencia Moral, and Patricio Trincado for helping us organize and supporting and just being a part of this event. We are so grateful for you all, and this event would have never happened without you guys, so thank you. And thank you so much to all our viewers for watching our live stream and sending in your questions, as well as supportive comments to our presentation and guest speakers. And if you would like to get involved with Amnesty International Japan or any of the multicultural groups that we have today, please contact the following emails, and we will get right back to you with answers to your questions or concerns. So thank you all for tuning in, and have a wonderful